Okay, we are back in Wings to Adventure, and it's Daniel Boone. All right. Oh, Daniel, cried Aaron, Kentucky is certainly a wonderful country, for I doubt that such a thing could happen in Pumpkin Grove. Oh, there's a heap of marvels to be seen in Kentucky, answered Daniel. Let's build a fire and have our supper. Tomorrow we can cut logs for a cabin. And when the cabin's built, we'll travel about and see some of the marvels for a fact. So that's what they did. They chopped up a hollow log and built a fire out of the pieces. Next morning, along about the time thrushes are singing, and the skies are getting gray, and the raccoons are going home to bed, Aaron woke up. Then he heard Daniel yell out, "Quick, tie up that end of the log while I tie up this end." Aaron sprang straight up and looked around. There was Daniel sitting up in his blankets, but Aaron couldn't see a hollow log anywhere, for they'd used the only one around for firewood. He opened his mouth to ask what log Daniel meant, but instead heard himself say, "Oh, Daniel, you're the cleverest fellow this side of the ocean." Aaron was positive it was not what he had it in mind to say. He shut his mouth and wondered how he had managed to say all that without once moving his jaw. Then the most awful noises started up all around him, grunts and screams and roars and snarls. Aaron knew all the varmints in Kentucky had heard he was there and had come to eat him. He put his hands over his ears and shut his eyes tight and stood there trembling. "It's just an echo, Aaron," yelled Daniel. But Aaron had his hands so tight over his ears he couldn't hear a word Daniel said. Daniel saw it was useless to try to tell Aaron what was happening, so he got up out of his blanket and mended the fire and put the deer meat on to boil. Aaron stood there waiting to be eaten. All of a sudden, he gave a big sniff, for the cooking stew was smelling mighty fine. He opened his eyes and saw Daniel baking ash bread. He took his hands from his ears and listened carefully. There wasn't a sound of any varmint, just the stew snuggling down in the kettle. Aaron looked around. His eyes got as big as bowls. "Daniel," he asked, "how'd you manage to kill that varmint? And what have you done with its big old carcass?" "Now sit down, Aaron, and eat," Daniel told him. "That wasn't a real live varmint. It was just an echo. This valley we're in is a powerful wide, and it just naturally takes a long spell for the echo to get back to us. What you heard was our hollering and the bear and the painter fighting yesterday evening." "Well, if that don't take the rag off the bush," Aaron exclaimed. "Folks at home will be mighty happy to hear that there's such a fine echo in Kentucky. Though an echo's not good for much, is it?" "Well, I've got a notion this echo is going to work for us," Daniel answered. Will it chop down trees and hunt for table meat?" asked Aaron. "Wait and see," was all Daniel said. All that day he and Aaron chopped logs for their cabin. Chopping down trees and trimming off branches is hard work. After supper, Aaron stretched and said, "I'm bone weary. I reckon I'll never wake up tomorrow morning. I'll probably just sleep right on through the day." "Now don't you worry your head about that," Daniel told him. Then he stood up and shouted, "Wake up, boys, it's getting up time." "Getting up time?" cried Aaron. "I've not even gone to bed yet." But Daniel laughed and told Aaron to get to bed and stop worrying. Next morning, just as the redbirds were whistling, and the sky was turning yellow, and owls were dragging themselves home to bed, Aaron heard a shout. "Wake up, boys, it's getting up time." "We don't need a crowing rooster to wake us up," cried Boone, hustling out of his blankets. "This echo will work for us every day and rouse us up good and early. I reckon we'll never be late now or in the cool of the day in bed. Daniel, for a fact, you're the cleverest fellow this side on this green earth." So Daniel and Aaron lived in their little cabin and every day they went hunting and exploring. Then finally they walked to Cumberland Gap and down the trail to Pumpkin Grove. There's a lot more to the story about Daniel Boone, but that's one part of the story. Daniel Boone. And tomorrow we'll switch gears into a different story. And I love you guys. I'm very proud of you. Just don't forget to say your prayers. read your Bible, ask questions, and keep an eye on one another. Good night and sweet dreams.